the sound of gold scraping against bone. Year 274 CE, you're standing in a Roman street, pressed against a stone wall with thousands of others. You can't move, you can barely breathe. Your only job today is to watch. In the center of the procession, a woman staggers forward. Her wrists are raw and wounded, not from rope, from gold. 40 pounds of solid gold chains wrapped around her arms, her neck, her ankles, so heavy that 2 Roman guards walk beside her, holding the chains up so she doesn't collapse face first into the cobblestones. That gold was hers 3 months ago. It paid her armies, built her temples, made her the most powerful woman between Egypt and Turkey. Now it's crushing her. Zenobia of Palmyra, the Queen of the East, the woman who humiliated 3 Roman emperors and ruled an empire of 70,000 soldiers. Now shuffling through Rome like a captive on display. The crowd screams. Rotten fruit explodes against her chest. Someone's spit lands on her face, and she can't wipe it because her hands are pinned down by her own stolen wealth. A child points and laughs. His mother lifts him higher so he can see better. But here's what you can't see from the street. Inside Zenobia's mind, a single thought repeats with every step. A prayer she's been whispering since dawn. Not the prayer you'd expect, not save me, not give me strength, just 3 words. Let it be the villa. Because she knows the 2 doors waiting at the end of this road. One leads to a comfortable prison where she'll live out her days as a Roman trophy. The other leads to a dark hole carved into the Capitoline Hill where Rome ends its enemies in the dark and makes sure nothing remains. 4 kilometers of not knowing which door has her name on it. 4 kilometers of smiling Romans deciding whether she lives or dies. 4 kilometers of praying to gods who have never answered. This is what Rome did to captured queens. Not just Zenobia, not just once. This was a system, perfected over 700 years, designed to break the most powerful women in the ancient world. And Zenobia, she was one of the lucky ones. The others suffered fates that made execution look like mercy. If this story grips you, drop a like. It takes a second and helps us pull more voices out of the silence. But before you understand what happened to the queens who weren't lucky, you need to understand what a Roman triumph actually was. Forget everything you've seen in movies. The real thing was worse. When a Roman general won a major war, the Senate could grant him a triumph, the highest honor in Roman society. A massive parade through the heart of the city, celebrating his victory. But this wasn't just a parade. It was psychological warfare disguised as a party. The procession started at the Field of Mars, outside the city walls. It wound through the streets for nearly 4 kilometers, ending at the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. The entire city shut down. Over 1 million people lined the route. Shops closed, courts adjourned. Even slaves got the day off, so they could watch other slaves being paraded in chains. Here's how the procession worked, and I want you to imagine yourself as a captured queen watching this approach. First, you hear the music, trumpets and drums echoing off stone buildings. The sound bounces through the streets for almost an hour before you see anything. Then come the carts, wagon after wagon, loaded with treasure stolen from your kingdom. Gold coins your ancestors minted, silver plates your grandmother ate from, sacred objects from temples your people built over centuries. The crowd cheers at each cart. They're calculating how much their taxes will go down now that Rome has your wealth. Then come the paintings, massive wooden boards carried by slaves, showing images of your cities burning, your soldiers dying, your palace being looted. Roman artists travelled with the legions specifically to paint these scenes. The crowd points at the paintings and laughs. They recognize your city. They cheer when they see it in flames. Then come the animals, exotic creatures from your homeland, lions in cages, elephants in chains, strange birds in golden cages, proof that Rome has conquered not just your people, but your very land. And then silence. The crowd goes quiet. The drumbeat slows, because now come the prisoners. Common soldiers first, hundreds of them chained together, shuffling forward with their heads down. They know they're walking to the slave markets. Their lives as free men are over, but the crowd barely looks at them. They're waiting for you. The captured rulers walk at the front of the prisoner column, still wearing royal garments, still adorned with crowns and jewelry. This is intentional. A beaten peasant means nothing, but a queen, still dressed in silk and gold, still recognizable as the ruler who defied Rome, now shuffling in chains, wounded, exhausted, humiliated. That's the message that echoes across the ancient world. No crown protects you. No army saves you. No throne is beyond our reach. And here's what the movies never show you: the uncertainty. Some captured rulers survived the triumph. They received exile, comfortable imprisonment, even integration into Roman society. Others were executed the moment the parade ended. Removed in an underground prison called the Tullianum while the celebration continued above them, and never seen again, their names erased from history. You never knew which fate awaited you until you reached the end of that 4-kilometer walk. That uncertainty was part of the torture. For captured queens, the calculation was even more complicated. A dead queen became a name erased, a trophy, forgotten in a week. But a living queen, broken, humiliated, visible for years as a reminder of Roman power, that was worth more than any execution, unless she was too dangerous to keep alive. The decision rested entirely with the emperor. And you wouldn't know his choice until a guard either handed you the keys to a villa or carried out the sentence. In 60 CE, on a cold island at the edge of the known world, a queen discovered exactly how little her crown was worth to Rome. Her name was Boudica, and her story is one of the most brutal in Roman history. She was queen of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe in what is now eastern England. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had spent his entire reign trying to keep peace with Rome. He paid their taxes, he followed their laws. He even left half his kingdom to Emperor Nero in his will, a desperate attempt to protect his family after his death. The other half he left to his 2 daughters. It was a reasonable plan, a compromise that should have satisfied everyone. Rome ignored it completely. Within days of Prasutagus' death, imperial officials arrived with soldiers. They announced that the entire kingdom now belonged to Rome. The will meant nothing. The alliance meant nothing. Decades of loyalty meant nothing. They began seizing everything. Iceni nobles were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night. Estates that had belonged to families for generations were confiscated before dawn. Relatives of the dead king were chained and marched into bondage while their children watched. Boudica protested. She was the queen. Her husband had been a Roman ally. There were treaties, there were laws. She demanded to speak with the procurator, a man named Catus Decianus. He agreed to meet with her. What happened next was recorded by the Roman historian Tacitus, whose father-in-law served in Britain during this period. Tacitus doesn't hide what happened. He doesn't soften it. He describes it with the kind of direct horror that tells you even Romans were disturbed by what their officials did. Boudica was seized by soldiers in front of her own people. They humiliated her in the public square. The queen, who had ruled beside her husband for decades, degraded before her subjects. They tied her to a post, and they flogged her. A Roman flogging wasn't like being hit with a belt. They used a fulcrum, a whip with multiple leather strips embedded with metal balls and fragments of sheep bone. Each strike tore flesh from muscle. Each blow left wounds that would scar for life. Victims often died from flogging alone. Boudica survived, but the flogging wasn't the worst part. Her daughters were brought forward. Tacitus doesn't give their ages. He doesn't name them. He simply says they were unmarried. The soldiers grabbed them by the arms. They took them away toward the soldiers' quarters. And Boudica, still tied to the post, still bleeding from the flogging, understood in that moment what was about to happen. She screamed. Not words, just sound. The raw animal scream of a mother watching her children being taken. She pulled against the ropes until her wrists bled, tried to tear herself free, begged in a language the Romans didn't understand and wouldn't have cared about if they did. The soldiers laughed. Tacitus says they were handed over to the soldiers. He doesn't describe what happened next. He didn't need to. Every Roman reading his account understood exactly what that phrase meant. What was done to them was done deliberately, not in private, not in secret, in front of the Iceni people, in front of their mother, still bleeding from the flogging, still tied to the post, made to watch helplessly from where she stood because closing her eyes meant abandoning them. This was the message. This was what happened to anyone who questioned Rome. Your queen is nothing. Your princesses are nothing. Your entire tribe is nothing. Catuus Decianus expected the Iceni to submit after this display. He expected them to be too terrified, too broken to resist. He was catastrophically wrong. Within weeks, Boudica raised an army. Not just the Iceni. Word of what happened to the royal family spread across Britain like wildfire. Tribes who had tolerated Roman rule for decades suddenly saw their own daughters in those princesses, their own wives in that flogged queen. They came by the thousands, then the tens of thousands. Boudica led them first to Camulodunum, the Roman capital of Britain. The city had no walls. The veterans who lived there had grown soft and complacent, convinced their conquered subjects would never dare to rise. The Iceni burned it to the ground. They left no one untouched, men, women, children, slaves, anyone with a connection to Rome. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't ask for surrender. This wasn't conquest. This was revenge. Londinium was next, the largest trading city in Britain. The Romans tried to evacuate, but thousands were left behind. Boudica's army showed no mercy. Archaeologists have found a layer of burned debris across London, dating to exactly this period, a red line of destruction that marks how completely the city was razed. Tacitus claims the final death toll was 70,000 Romans and Roman allies. Other sources put it even higher, and through it all Boudica led from the front, riding a chariot, her daughters beside her, the same daughters who had been wronged in the public square, now watching Roman cities burn. Tacitus preserved a speech he attributed to her before the final battle. Standing before her army, she declared that she came not as a queen fighting for her kingdom. She came as a mother, avenging what had been done to her daughters. The final battle came at a location that's never been identified. Roman discipline and tactical positioning overcame Boudica's larger but disorganized force. The rebellion was crushed. Boudica poisoned herself rather than be captured. She knew what Rome did to captured queens. She had already experienced a taste of it. Her daughters disappear from history after the initial assault. Their names were never recorded, their fates unknown. Maybe they died in battle. Maybe they took poison beside their mother. Maybe they were captured and suffered the very fate Boudica had fought to avenge. We'll never know. Rome made sure of that. 40 years before Boudica painted Britain red with Roman blood, another queen learned that sometimes survival is its own form of torture. Her name was Thusnelda, and her story might be the cruelest of all, not because of what was done to her body, but because of what was done to her bloodline. She was the wife of Arminius, a Germanic chieftain who handed Rome its most humiliating military defeat in history. You might not know his name, but you know what he did. In 9 CE, Arminius ambushed 3 entire Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. 15,000 soldiers walked into that forest. Almost none walked out. 3 days of slaughter in the rain and mud. Legion eagles, the sacred standards that represented Rome itself, captured by barbarians. The commander Varus took his own life rather than be taken alive. When news reached Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the world reportedly wandered his palace for months afterward, banging his head against the walls, screaming into the darkness, "Varus, give me back my legions!" Rome never forgot that defeat. They never forgave it. And when they couldn't capture Arminius himself, they went after everyone he loved. Thusnelda was betrayed by her own father. His name was Segestes, a Germanic chief who had opposed his daughter's marriage to Arminius from the beginning. He had always supported Rome, always believed cooperation was better than resistance. When Roman forces returned to Germania seeking revenge, Segestes saw an opportunity to prove his loyalty. He kidnapped his own pregnant daughter and handed her over to the legions. Let that sink in. Her own father. While she was carrying his grandchild, he traded his daughter and his unborn grandchild for Roman favour, for political advantage, for a pat on the head from the empire that wanted to destroy everything his people had built. The Romans were delighted. They couldn't have Arminius, but they had the next best thing, his wife and his unborn heir. They kept Thusnelda imprisoned but alive. They let her give birth in captivity, a son named Thumelicus, the heir to Arminius, the prince of the Cherusci, the grandson of Rome's greatest military humiliation. They waited until 17 CE, when the general Germanicus finally had enough victories in Germania to claim a triumph. And that's when they paraded Thusnelda through Rome. Imagine this scene. A Germanic queen, proud wife of the man who made Augustus weep, walking in chains through streets filled with Romans who had lost fathers, brothers, and sons in that forest, her infant son in her arms. The crowd didn't just jeer, they howled for blood. They screamed for the baby to be killed right there in the street. Mothers pointed at the child and told their own children, "That's the spawn of the monster who killed your uncle, your father, your grandfather." A child in the crowd threw a stone. It struck Thusnelda's shoulder, then another stone, then another. Roman soldiers had to form a barrier around her, not to protect her, but to make sure she survived long enough to complete the procession. The Roman writer Strabo described Thusnelda's face during the triumph. He expected her to weep, to beg, to collapse like so many prisoners before her. She didn't. She walked with her eyes fixed forward. Her face showed nothing. No fear, no tears, no satisfaction given to the mob that wanted to see her broken. But here's what Strabo couldn't see. Inside, Thusnelda was making a promise, not to the gods, not to her husband fighting somewhere in the forests of Germania, to the infant boy pressed against her chest. She whispered it so quietly that no one heard, in the Germanic tongue that Romans couldn't understand. "They will not break you. Whatever they do, wherever they take you, you are the son of Arminius. You carry his blood, and one day... She never finished the promise, because she already knew she couldn't keep it. She held her son against her chest and walked 4 kilometers through pure hatred, but her defiance couldn't protect him. Thumelicus was raised as a Roman slave, the heir to Germania's greatest hero, the prince who should have led his people against Rome, was instead trained as a gladiator. Think about what that means. Romans went to the arena to watch prisoners fight for entertainment. They ate figs and drank wine while men struggled on the sand. They cheered when combat ended, when a body fell, when victory was declared. And somewhere in that arena, fighting for their amusement, was the son of the man who had defeated 3 legions. The emperors knew exactly who he was. Every time they watched him fight, they were watching the son of their greatest enemy struggle to survive. Every wound he took was revenge for Teutoburg. Every time he prevailed, he was proving that Rome had broken the bloodline of Arminius. Most Romans in the crowd had no idea. They just saw another barbarian with a sword, trying to survive another day. But that was the point. The prince of the Cherusci reduced to anonymous entertainment, his royal blood meaning nothing, his father's legacy erased with every fight. Did Thumelicus know who he was? Did anyone ever tell him that his father was a hero, that his mother had been a queen, that he was supposed to lead armies, not die for applause? Or did he grow up believing he was nothing? Just another slave, just another body for the arena. We'll never know, because Rome made sure no one recorded his story. The sources say he died at Ravenna, lost in the arena, the last of Arminius's bloodline, his life ending on the sand while Romans cheered and ate their lunch. Nobody recorded it his final opponent. Nobody remembered his last words.